In this video, I'm going to be talking to Jerry Hammack, who wrote a new book on the Beatles. Actually, it's going to be a series of books. So, Jerry, how you doing?
Doing great, Adam. It's nice to be here with you tonight.
Well, thanks for coming to Real Home Recording. Thanks for contacting me about your book because actually my family are really big Beatles fans
Oh, that's great.
and they're going to be jealous of me for talking to you and being the first to see the book. And no, they're not getting a free copy. So how long did you take to make this book?
Well, I've been working on the series for 8 years. Uh, started back, a long time ago now. It's going to be about a four-book, or it is going to be a four-book series when all is said and done. I'm releasing them in about 6-month increments. So the first book's out now. The next book will follow in about 6 months. The total of them will be available within the next 18 months. So right now, book one, volume one is My Bonnie through Beatles for Sale. That's volume one. Volume two will cover Help through Revolver, which is the 65-66 period. Volume three will cover just 1967 with Sgt. Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour. And the final volume will cover 68 through 70, which is the Beatles, the White Album through Abbey Road.
Nice. And so yeah, like I said, because of all that work, you got to pay for that, man. That's a lot of research. And about how many hours per day or per week did you spend making
It,
this?
it's a full-time job. I was at least 8 hours a day, 8 hours a day, up to 6 days a week, minimum. And that would depend if I had, just where I was at with the activity, gathering reference data, parsing it, going through and tying the pieces together. The Beatles recording history is it's a bit of a tangled, and I describe it in the introduction to the book as it's a bit of a knot. So the pieces are out there, but it's all tangled up. And so, yeah, my work was to unravel it to create sort of a linear understanding of the recording of these songs from first take to final remix. So I discovered through my own needs, it was that there was no place that I could go to just get that story, of where they started with the tune to where they ended with the tune and what went into its creation. And when I would be doing work as an audio engineer, I'd often get questions from my clients saying, "Hey, I'd love to get McCartney's bass sound on Pepper on this," or "Can you give me Clapton's solo sound on While My Guitar Gently Weeps?" And so they're like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure I can get you that, and give me a bit." And I'd go off and do some research and kind of track down, how they get that sound for McCartney, or how they get that sound for Clapton. And the pieces, or the majority of the pieces, were out there, but they were all over the place. And then I found out through this research that a lot of the information was out of date or fundamentally wrong. And so my goal was to sort this story out for all of the Beatles songs, 409 or so of them, once and for all, set the record straight, where there was conflicting historical accounts to sort those out and help people understand the conflicts that were in the record and what the most accurate telling of this story was.
Cool. And the thing that stuck out for me was that you put everything in chronological order. You didn't do it like an album order with like I had expected, or singles order or EP order. Everything's chronological so that it's almost like you're not really there in the studio, but you're like a kind of fly on the wall.
Well, there's a couple of ways, again, because it's a reference book. There's a number of ways that you can go through it, and I think it serves anywhere from a Beatles fan to a Beatles scholar to an audio engineer or producer or a student of audio engineering and producing, much like the viewers of your channel, people that want to understand how to do this work. So you do have the narratives that, as you say, are in chronological order, following the creation of the songs in order, and then from, again, the first take to the final remix. There's appendices to the book that do the absolute day-to-day order of the sessions and get very granular about who was there, what was done, what equipment was used. And this gets to, I think, a level of granularity that hasn't been approached before, in terms of if you want to know what speaker was in the Vox AC36 amplifier that they were using in 1963, 64, I have that information for you.
Cool. Now, before we go further, can you give me some background information about who you are?
Yeah, so Jerry Hammack is my name. I'm originally from the United States. I'm an expatriate American living in Canada. I've done audio engineering and producing for 30, 35 years now, going way back, and I've done also a myriad of things, but that's my been a focus across my life, and a lifelong fan of the Beatles, and student of the Beatles, and student of engineering and recording. So that's where I come from, and this interest to do this work was born out of practical need to get these things sorted out for clients that I had for engineering or producing jobs.
So, who is the intended audience for your book?
So I believe the book, or I wrote the book for people like myself that are audio engineers, but more broadly, I recognized that it needed to be of service to straight up Beatles fans, to scholars that want to understand in depth this process of creating these songs, engineers, producers that might want to get that Beatles sound and want to understand what tools were in play to bring those songs to life. So that broad range of readers is what I believe the book serves, and who it's intended to serve. As I mentioned earlier, the information is organized so that you can go through it at a number of paths. There are, for instance, diagrams in the book that follow the recording process at each critical milestone. Just a casual Beatle fan could look at those diagrams with their headphones on, or their in front of their stereo, and listen to the songs, and they would be able to hear the breakout of the tracks as is described in those diagrams, and understand just a little bit deeper about how those songs were put together.
Yeah, that's actually what I was doing while I was reading your book. I was playing, because I have like the 2009 remasters,
Yeah,
and
those
it's
are great.
and it's interesting because especially with I really just read like the first two albums. I read your the parts about that, and when it's broken out, the was weird these days, but I know a lot of albums back then, they didn't have like a center panning function. Like it was either left or right, and that was it, I think.
Well, actually, the red boards that they used, and they used two boards in the early years. Actually, throughout their career, they had access to a couple of red boards. There was the Red 37 and the Red 51. These were EMI manufactured boards specific to the studios, and you're correct. There were two channels, or I believe, or four channels, 1, 2, 7, 8 were fixed pan left or right. However, channels 3 and 4 on the input side were you're able to vary the pan on those. 1 and 2 were you're able to adjust somewhat the width of it, but in the way that it was used by the Beatles, primarily it was fixed pan left or right. And then when they were doing the early recordings in 2-track, those they would assign very commonly they would assign the backing band recording to the left channel and the vocals to the right channel.
So that's just something that was commonplace back then?
Well, it was common in that in the UK and for pop recordings they were going for mono, so that breakout wasn't initially problematic for the Beatles or problematic for Martin. It was just the way that they did things. As their consciousness was more fully developed around stereo in the later years. So when you get into the Revolver and Pepper years, they changed somewhat the way that they worked with the boards and the inputs on the board to allow them the variable pan on any of the inputs that they were using. So that just became a way in practice that they embraced stereo a little bit more. But they didn't fully embrace stereo until you're talking really the White Album was the first time that they really started to embrace stereo. They only gave a cursory nod to it in their attentions all the way through Pepper.
Yeah, I have a question for you because I didn't live back then, obviously. I had heard that the Grateful Dead actually had contributed a lot of like how like the modern stereo, the use of stereo panning came out. Is that true? And when was the Grateful Dead founded? Were they around during the Beatles era or not?
Well, my brother's the deadhead of the family, but I can. But the Dead started doing their thing in San Francisco in the mid '60s as the Warlocks, and they were part of the early San Francisco psychedelic scene. As to whether how involved they were in changing attitudes toward the soundscape, I couldn't answer that specifically. What you're dealing with there, I think the thing to keep in mind for your viewers as well is that these are simply limitations in the technologies that were built in place. So it could, the way that the boards are manufactured was either to fix the pans or to allow a variable pan. Again, the EMI stuff was all house built, and purpose built. Now, you get over into the U.S. with the technologies, and they were working in stereo as opposed to focused on mono. Stereo was adopted very early in the U.S. and very commonly early recordings were done on 3-track in the U.S. So that so if you listen to some early recordings, you definitely hear a left-right center sort of vibe in a lot of early pop recordings coming out of the U.S.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's cool. I actually thought it went 2-track to 4-track to 8-track and then up to 24 and then 48. I didn't know there was a 3-track.
Yeah, there were 3 tracks. Ampex 3 tracks were very common back in the day.
So there's a lot of Beatle books out there. I know people are going to be saying this in the comments section probably. What makes yours stand out from the other ones?
Well, this I believe is unique in the plethora of books that are out there. This book series is unique. There isn't a book series or any books that follow the path of each song from first take to final remix. They may eventually tell or weave the story of a song, but there's no place where you can just follow the creation of the song. There's also no books out there that allow you to parse that creative work in through multiple views. So again, I've got a view for the fan, which is the straight narrative telling the story of the creation of the song, accompanied by the diagrams that allow them to listen and learn through that path. For the for the people that want to go deeper, I've provided these the appendices that allow you to go session by session and follow then the literal day by day work that was done in the studio, and get a real granular understanding of that. And then finally, if you're a real scholar, all of this information that I've provided, it's both my insights from my years of studying this matter, of gathering photographic evidence, audio evidence. As an example, my collection of Beatles takes, outtakes, mixed versions, release versions is somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,700 tracks. So I've all of that's there now for your straight up Beatles scholars, like your hardcore scholars. I've also noted every source where it isn't it isn't my pure scholarship, but where I've parsed other scholarship to assist in bringing this story to life. It's chapter and verse noted. So for people that want to go even deeper, I've given them the tools to do that too. So I think that makes these books very unique in the catalog of Beatles books that are out there.
Okay, sounds good to me. Now, who besides yourself, obviously, was involved, responsible for making this book all come together?
Well, the help that I got from a couple of engineers, former EMI engineers and Beatles engineers, in particular Richard Langham and Ken Scott, made all the difference in the world, because they both helped me vet some core information that I was putting together for accuracy. Was I actually getting the story right? Was I interpreting the information correctly that I had gathered as I was assembling it? They helped in just invaluable way to fact check me on these things. Richard Langham for the early years, he was the second engineer that was involved in the Please Me recordings, and all the way through Hard Day's Night he was working. Ken Scott got involved with the Beatles later on. He started as a tape operator, and then by the time of Magical Mystery Tour, he was a balance engineer working on the recordings, and he worked all the way through the White Album period. It was fundamental to the sound of the White Album. So those two guys were pretty key in really helping me be sure I was getting the story as right as it could be told, at this date. But you can't do any of this stuff. You don't have the support of and encouragement of, especially over 8 years of, friends and family. You certainly can't do it without the generosity of those that help you, again, vet information. Talk to guys at Fender and Gretsch and different piano companies and whatnot. They were just helping me really nail down the granularity of the data and help me, again, get the story right, get the information right, get the specs right on what I was sharing. So it took a lot. It took a lot of assistance over a long time to bring it together.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd have the patience to put a book like that together. That's amazing. I applaud you for. I mean, you really got to be a hardcore Beatles fan, honestly. So.
Yeah, one of the tricks with this is what I was doing, and this was going on daily, was you'd get a piece of information that would reverberate through everything that you'd done. Maybe it had to do with the use of a echo chamber or a particular piece of gear, and so what these books do, or how they tell the story accurately, is it's not only the gear that was there. I'll take that path. The gear that was in use had to be the gear that was in use in that studio during that era by that engineer. all those things had to line up in order for the story of what was in play to be accurate. And if I'd get any information that twist or that turned on a light that I didn't know about before, that reverberated through all of it, then I'm constantly was going back through all of the data again to be sure that wherever that particular set of instances lined up, that I had lined it up. So yeah, again, unraveling this furball of history has been, it's been something.
Like you said, it's a knot.
It's a knot.
So, now, like I said, I only saw like the first two albums,
Yeah,
or okay, I'm including the singles in there too.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so does the book eventually talk about like equalizers and compressors that were used? Because I saw a lot of microphones and guitar amps and drum sets and things like that. But uh, do you talk about that type of gear too?
Yeah, so when you get back into the day-by-day session listings, each session listing includes the whole lineup of outboard gear that was used for that particular session. So I don't go into anything about the operation or the specs on that gear, that kind of gear. Uh, uh, as I mentioned before, before we started taping, I had no intention, and in fact guarded myself against rewriting someone else's book. So there were a couple of authors that did a massive book. Ryan and Kiyu did a massive book called "Recording the Beatles," and in that they detail every single piece of gear used in the EMI studios, and they tell you all of the detailed core specifications, how that gear worked, I mean, it's absolutely exhaustive. It's just a masterwork. If people want to get that granular about the gear, there's the resource for them. And the same thing with the Beatles gear book that Andy Babuck did. That book tells of kind of the genealogy of the gears that flowed through the Beatles' hands, and he does he's tracked down purchase orders for guitars and blah blah blah. I'm not doing that. I'm not rewriting their book or their books. So I do note in again the daily listings all of the gear that was involved. In the glossaries I give an overview of an explanation of what that gear is and how it was applied in the Beatles sessions.
Okay.
But I don't get granular about it in the way that these other authors have.
It sounds like you covered it enough. I regret not going to the appendices and seeing that for myself. But okay, I mean, if you just gave a general overview, I mean, like you said, you're kind of trying to reach not just recording engineers, but a general audience. A general audience isn't going to care about purchase orders and the signal to noise ratio of a
Bingo.
Fairchild 660 or 670.
Bingo. Yeah,
So I got you on that.
Yeah, that's that information is out there, but not pertinent to tell the story that I was telling. And again, I judiciously guarded against telling or writing someone else's book. I wanted to write the book I didn't have. I have those books, so I don't need to write that book, right?
Yeah, I agree. That's like not to get off topic, but people would ask, why don't you do this topic? I'm like, I already covered that topic, so why would I make another video about that topic? Like, it's redundant. So,
Right.
so I'm guarded on my channel when it comes to that. It's like I'm building a library, not a clickbait tower, you know. So,